The next speaker is co-chairman of Arise Virtual Solutions. Her name is Angie Selden. Angie had established a fabulous career as a partner at Accenture before coming into executive management with Arise Virtual Solutions. And what Angie and her team have done in fundamental innovation to bring step change to an industry has gotten notice at the highest levels of the U.S. government, where she regularly is invited to Washington to meet with the Obama administration about jobs creation around some of the innovative techniques that they have applied. Very, very exciting speaker, and I want her to come and tell her story. What I gave her in terms of marching orders is tell us your growth story over these last 5 years in particular, and don't hold back, because this story is an outstanding story, and Angie's an outstanding leader and a great speaker. Please welcome Angie Selden, Arise Virtual Solutions.
So much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dorman, and also to the rest of the folks from Frost&Sullivan. We are really honored to be able to share our story with you this afternoon. And before I begin, I'd like to also introduce two of my colleagues who are here today, Karen, who is standing right here, sitting, and now standing, and David. And between the three of us, we will have the opportunity to answer any questions you all might have at the end of the session today, because I've gathered from the day that we'll keep questions to the after session. So what I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing with you is the story of Arise, but I'm delighted that we followed the topic that we had just the last hour or so, which is how you determine the strategies that are going to drive and accelerate your business forward. Because some of the things that we use, the techniques that we use, really came from some of the thinking and the characteristics that were present in those workshops. So I think those are very powerful tools as you think about looking for the next dimension of innovation inside your own business. So first I'd like to see a raise of hands. How many of you work 1 day a week from home? Okay, keep your hand up if you work more than 3 days a week from home. Okay, so we have a couple people there. And I guess I'm interested from the people who had their hands up, is the work that you do at home the same type of work that you do when you have to go to the office? You say yes, you say no. You say yes. Okay, very interesting. So the first thing that we did when we were identifying what's going on from a trend perspective in the industry was saying business processes are atomizing. It's kind of a crazy word, but in essence what we concluded was in the 70s, everybody was vertically integrated. And it was interesting to hear today that DuPont's going back to vertical integration with their seed to lubricant integrated production. So each one of these will play a role in your business. In the 80s, it was supply chain disaggregation. And that was the big focus, and tons of technology companies and consulting firms like Accenture built a business around supply chain disaggregation. In 2000, what happened were those functions, manufacturing, distribution, etc., then were disaggregated a bit further, and specialties and specialty suppliers started to get created in order to create more efficiency and more effectiveness. And now what we're seeing happening with the advent of technology in this era, in 2010 and beyond, is that we can now take those business processes and break those functions down even further. So the measure of success can be at the transaction level and can be broken up and completed at the transaction level. And that's what we're seeing happening with the atomization of business. Next, technology, as we all know, is accelerating consumer expectation. We've already talked about Apple today, and we've talked about Steve Jobs. How many of you have more than 5 Apple devices in your home? I don't believe you. There has to be, count your iPods, count your old, all your old technology phones that you have, right? Anyone who has children, you must have at least 10 in your household. Okay, think about the transformation that has occurred in such a short period of time in the way that consumers are interacting, not just with Apple, but the way that they're interacting in every aspect of their daily life. And what happens when consumers have that knowledge? Do they become more sophisticated in what they need and want? Do they become more demanding? Are they smarter, so thus their questions are harder to answer because they've already got the basic questions answered online themselves? You think that's the trend that's happening with consumers generally? At least I see it. I was at an eco fair last week, and my daughter, who's 10, found a water bottle that was earth-friendly and thought that instead of taking a disposable water bottle to school every day, she's going to bring now this. And she said, "Mom, I need your credit card." And I said, "What do you need my credit card for?" She said, "I've gone online and I found the website from the place that was presenting at the eco fair today on my iPad, and I typed it in, and I just need to buy this product." I'm like, "You're 10 years old, what are you doing," right? But she absolutely has become this very knowledgeable and competent consumer, and technology is driving her competence. At the same time, technology is driving the way that work is getting done. And if you think about even 10 years ago, there wouldn't have been a single hand in this room raised for people who are working from home more than 3 days a week. But what technology has enabled us to do is to disaggregate the work, break it down into functions, figure out the things that can be done remotely from home versus the things that need to be done in the office with teams. And we've atomized the work, and we use technology to make us more effective and efficient. Well, what society is now doing is taking that a step further. And what society is saying is, now that empowers me to be able to work when I choose to work. I bet if you're working at home, you don't have to raise your hands for this one because we don't want you to snitch on yourself. But if you're working from home, are you working the same hour definition that you would in the office? Probably not. You probably have a personal thing you need to do in the middle of the day. You probably pick up some things at night. And the fact that technology is there helps you determine when, how often, and the kinds of things that you're getting done at home. So that's what we mean when we're saying work is getting done and reinvented in a different way. So what's happening is enterprises and the workforce have needs. What do companies need? They don't want geography to dictate where they can get talent from anymore. They believe that competition can breed better outcomes in the talent pool. They don't want people to believe that once they're hired, they have the right to actually not be as effective now that they've kind of gotten that promotion or been hired into the company. They don't believe any longer that it's necessary to have an obligation for a certain amount of hours per week that an employee needs to have. And on the workforce side, the workforce is saying some of the same exact things. I have a superior skill set. Perhaps I'm an attorney or I have a technology skill. And I can deploy that skill to not just one company. I can work for multiple companies. I don't need to be employed 40 hours a week to any individual company. I want flexibility in my scheduling. I want to be able to choose where, when, and how often I work. And I want to not be bored. I want to be able to use my skills to make my life interesting, provide for my family, and not be bored. So what's happening as a result is these two needs, along with the advent of technology, along with this atomization of work, the ability to measure outcomes at a very small transactional level, is creating the opportunity now for virtual services to be born. And that's really one of the things that I'm going to spend some time talking about today. What virtual services also allows someone to do is to change the minimum of acceptable performance. If this is just the average performance curve of, say, one of your larger aggregate workforces, it's a curve with standard deviations, and most of your folks are going to be within the first standard deviation of performance. But imagine for a minute if you had the opportunity to say, no, in fact, the only level of performance that will now be acceptable for this type of work is 2 or 3 standard deviations above what we've normally expected in the past. Could you do that in a traditional work environment? Probably not. Probably not. Or else you'd be firing an awful lot of people over and over and over again in order to try and move to that 2nd or 3rd standard deviation. But when you virtualize the work, when you create a transaction-based outcome, when you can buy services not based on the fact that I am obligated to give someone 40 hours a week of work, but instead I can buy a particular type of capability from one individual and another capability from another individual, and be able to aggregate talent without boundaries and geography to create the best talent solution, now I can get to second and third deviation performance in a fundamentally different way. So you say, well, that's interesting, but can we enable it? Well, in the UK alone, over 83% of the UK has internet penetration. So that means that if you all decided you were going to reinvent the way that your work was done every day, you were going to say, I'm going to work from home 5 days a week. I'm going to figure out how to atomize my work. I'm going to figure out how I can work from home. You have the capability and the tools and all the infrastructure, broadband, computing power, the ability to route content, remote terminals, the way to teach people through e-learning. All of that's present and available. All the tools and infrastructure you need to reinvent the way your company does business and to take advantage of some of these trends exists in the market today. So where have we seen atomization and virtualization making a big impact? It happened first in goods, and that was eBay. eBay was a great example of how the marketplace brought the buyers and the sellers together. It disaggregated. It's no longer a yard sale. You no longer have to show up. You've atomized it. It's virtual. And all of a sudden, this giant company was born out of this concept of innovation. And now what's happening is those same practices of atomization and virtualization are being applied in the service sector as well. This first example is a company called Innocentive. And basically what they are is a virtual R&D company. So if you have a research and development problem that you'd like to solve, how many of you have R&D organizations? Okay, how many of you have more than 10 people in your R&D organization? Okay, you're lucky, because you could get 10 different ideas, right? You could throw the problem out to the 10 people in your R&D organization, and you may get 10 different ideas. Chances are you're going to get 2 or 3 because those people are all living in your ecosystem every day. But imagine if you threw it out to Innocentive and said, hey, I have this research and development project I'd like people to work on. Basically what happens is people on a project basis bid on this opportunity and they submit their ideas for free. And only the best idea gets paid. Now, they get paid a lot. They'll get paid $10,000 or $50,000, depending upon how important the idea is to you. But nevertheless, imagine how much more effective you could be at R&D if you were able to atomize the problem, break it into pieces that could be sent into Innocentive, and have the opportunity for people to give you their best thinking. And you don't have to pay for hundreds of people's best ideas. You just have to pay for the one you like the best. It's happening in a company called Topcoder. Anybody use Topcoder here? You got to try it. It's unbelievable. And this is coming from an Accenture partner whose entire business was built around technology integration, in the 90s and the early 2000 decade. 407,000 people do the exact same thing for technology projects that Innocentive does for R&D. You take a big IT project, break it into bite-sized chunks, and you put it out into the Topcoder environment, and you ask people to construct their idea of the solution. And you only pay for the best. And what's even more fascinating about Topcoder and the psyche of this group of people is they actually don't care about the money. They care about how many times their project was actually picked, because there's a gaming characteristic built into this company that gives people points for the number of times their solutions and their ideas are picked, and they're always vying to see who's the number 1 through number 10 top picks on Topcoder. Amazing. You have to look it up. Same thing's happening in law. How many times do you have a general counsel who is phenomenal but not gifted in some particular area of HR policy that's been violated, or you have a lawsuit pertaining to some patent, and all of a sudden you have to start hiring outside help? Well, this company called Axiom allows you to do that by hiring out law talent on a project-by-project basis. And again, because it's done virtually, you actually have the opportunity to spend far less money than if you were to use a traditional law firm to actually help you out. And as you can imagine, the workers love it too, because again, what do they get? Freedom. They get the opportunity to do the project when they want, how often they want, right? And the hours of the day, the duration of the length of the project. They can opt in. Well, that's the fundamental platform of Arise. Arise is doing in the contact center space what some of these other companies are innovating in their respective spaces as well. And what we have been able to do is take a company who had 3,000 at-home workers in 3 counties of southeastern Florida in 2005 and build a company that now has 32,000 workers, 3,000 of which are here in the UK, 2,000 of which are in Canada, and the rest in the United States, who 100% are working from home, doing calls, emails, and chat transactions, contact center type work, when they want, how often they want, and every single transaction is atomized. Basically, we measure the outcome of each of those transactions, and we award them compensation for the results they produce on every single one of those transactions. So we lead the industry in the contact center space for virtual services. We're the largest in the world and have really built and accelerated the growth of the business over the last 6 years by taking advantage of some of these trends that I was talking with you about. The outcome for our clients, and the reason why people just cannot get enough of the access to this talent, is number one, we see companies improving the overall financial performance of the functions that use virtual services by 30%. What does that mean? It's 30% cheaper, and that's just at the SG&A line. You can also eliminate facilities and the OpEx associated with that CapEx and have even far greater savings. All the other things we talked about that are trends that people want, I want to work from home, I don't want to drive to a building, you can source talent from anywhere. So you're no longer restricted to having to have someone have to drive to a building. So you can only pull talent from a 25-mile radius. You can train and upskill without a physical location. Every remote device is secured. You can actually match the talent that you need in 30-minute intervals to the actual demand patterns of what you expect your customers to require. So you could have 5 people working at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you could have 500 people working at 8 o'clock in the morning. Because again, since people don't have to drive into a facility, they don't have to expect an 8-hour workday, they can sign on and sign off as they're working from home, the opportunity for that flexibility is endless. And all performance management is also done virtually. So we say to us, because virtualization is really a bit of an overused word, especially in the technology industry today, unleash untapped talent, use cloud-based secure technology, free your company to variabilize the work, break it into atoms, and allow it to be done flexibly just exactly when your customers need you, any location, and deliver superior results at a lower cost. So in essence, what we're saying is, think about ways in your company where you can now begin to bring the work to the worker, as opposed to requiring the workers to always have to go to the work. And you will begin to reinvent the way that your company does business. Frost&Sullivan has shared with us that virtualization is mainstream and that the largest percentage of growth in outsourcing in the next 3 years is going to be in work at home. Dorman said he wanted the story of Arise, and this, I could stand here, as you can tell, and talk for another 4 or 5 hours on this, but I'll give you the thumbnail. In 97 to 2005, I said we were located in the state of Florida only, and it was a consortium to help disabled people in the state of Florida get work. And 80% of the agents lived there at the time, and nothing was virtualized. Everything was come to our office for training, and as a result, there was no ability for us to scale. What happened is we got a private equity investment, and the professionalization of the business started to grow. We changed the name. In 2008, we launched in the UK, And we implemented solutions that allow our clients to not just use our virtual workers, but to use their own people with our tools working from their home location, if that's a solution they prefer. We call that VTE, or Virtualize the Enterprise. In 2009, when we started, after we had stabilized the operations and reinvented the way the work was done so that everything could be virtualized, then we said, let's accelerate the growth. We focused on delivering this virtualization at scale. We won the largest telecom contract deal in Canada and expanded into our third geography. And we launched the biggest program in the history of the company in 11 weeks. And we added consulting and technology capability to the suite of outsourcing services we offer. And the net result from 2005 to 2011 is that we grew the business 13x. 13x revenue growth in one of the most critical, debilitating economic environments in modern history. So it's a great story about how you leverage virtualization and atomization for reinvention of your business. How much more time do I have, Dorman? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to go and say a couple of things on the last two slides. There are many choices about how this work can get done. And people outsource offshore, they outsource onshore, they may keep it in-house. Those choices have to be evaluated for the transaction types. What we have found repeatedly is that our clients have concluded that if I can reduce costs by 30% by simply not paying for unused time, and I can have in-market, local talent communicating with my customer every day versus having that transaction sent offshore, that's a winning strategy. It's cost and quality, which is one of the biggest challenges anybody running a contact center has today, because you often are having to trade off one for the other. The example here is our folks get paid only for the productive minute. So as a result, for the same amount of minutes, we would need, in this scenario, 50 FTEs versus the 67 that a company would typically hire and pay. And that's because that 60% productivity doesn't mean people are not good when they're on the phone. It means that you're paying for meals and break time, you're paying for training time, you're paying for those people to be on vacation, et cetera. And that's not part of a virtualized model. And so you can see the efficiency that's being driven simply here already by the fact that you can reduce your FTEs by that amount. We talked about the ability to match call arrival patterns to exactly when your customers are calling. And what we didn't discuss already was the light blue is all that time you're paying for people to sit without work. But the red is the opportunity lost if someone doesn't answer your call, especially if it's a sales call. So this kind of model not only reduces costs, but it capitalizes on the peaks as well. So I just want to share with you in closing that clients win and business owners win. We call the folks that do the work the business owners. And it's really because what the clients now have access to is talent in a geography that's unmatched by any other talent that they can access. And at the same time, they actually are tapping the labor pool that they may never have been able to touch before. And what the people doing the work have the opportunity to do is construct a work schedule and an income for their families that gives them the opportunity to select their hours, to select the clients they work on, just like any of the models I talked about, in Incentive, Axiom, Top Coder. Every one of those environments and every one of those functions gives people the freedom to choose when, how often, and with whom they're working, which in essence is reinventing the social contract that now exists between the worker and the work that needs to get done. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dormant, and thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the invention and the reinvention of Arise. I have a few more slides.